All right, let's now look at an example of where we might need to write our own generic function or use generics. So I'm in the app now, in the Pokedex app, in the hooks directory. We're actually going to convert our use fetch hook to TypeScript, and we're going to do that using generics. And our use fetch hook is a good example of a function that could use a generic because fetch inherently is a generic type of function, right? Like we don't know what type of data we're fetching, but to give ourselves better type safety, it would be good to be able to supply that information in advance. So let's start with the first error that we see here. So URL is going to be a string. And when I'm dealing with a function here, to actually define the generic, I could put that in between the curly braces or the round brackets and the actual function name here. So first we need to give a name to our generic. And the generic information that I intend to supply is the data, because that's what we're most interested in kind of typing when we use our fetch function here. So I'll go ahead and use data. So where are we going to use data? Well, if we look at the two first areas that need a better typing supplied is this data hook and this error hook. Currently, they don't have any default value supplied, meaning that if we hover over data, data is just undefined, and that's all it ever is going to be. So let's go ahead and just simply supply our data generic here. So what we're saying when we use our useFetch function is that data is going to be, whatever function we apply here is going to be of type data. So we'll show how to actually use this in practice in just a second. Now, error is also undefined. And generally, obviously it depends on the application. For our case here, we can actually use a type that is globally available to us called error. So this interface of error, if I click into that, it's going to take us to a globals.d.ts. And where does this come from? Well, this actually comes from this node file. And this, along with the, let's take another look at this here. This, along with some of the other type definition files that we've imported here, like jest, give us some globally available things that we don't need to import. So there's a bit of magic going on behind the scenes. It'll probably trip you up initially, but over time you'll kind of intuitively learn what you always just have access to. Error is one of those things. Where else can we add a type here? I think we can also add a type. It's not forcing us to, but our parsed response. So what are we doing in this hook here? We're fetching, we're calling response.json, and then we've got our parsed response here, which is currently typed as any, which is fine, but it makes it more difficult to catch if there's problems. So we can also use our data generic here, which is good. So if we were to use our useFetch function, I'm just going to use it arbitrarily in our index.ts file here. This isn't the best example, but if we just create a function called test component, and we return just a div here, hi, let's just import arbitrarily our useFetch. So we can call. And you can see right away it's missing our argument. So let's give it a URL. I'm just going to give it an arbitrary URL for now. CA. Obviously, we're not going to fetch anything useful here. However, what do we return from fetch? Well, we return this object, which is data. So if we go ahead and destructure data out, so data equals fetch, what type is data now? Data is unknown. And data is unknown because we're not supplying our generic yet. So if we supply our generic, maybe this API returns an array of string. We can go string array. What type is data now? Data is string array or undefined, which is exactly what we'd expect, because if it catches or we don't get the data back, it's going to be undefined. Otherwise, it's going to be this string array. So make sure you copy this down because you're going to need this code that we've written here for the exercise. All right, I'll see you in the next video.